I'm Clint Cearley, professional illustrator, and we're going to break down the creation process of a recent cover image I did for Dragon Plus magazine. Let's take a look. This image on the left is what I created for the cover, and this episode is sponsored by Skillshare. But more about them and the illustration class I have on their platform at the end of the video. But what I want to start with is some background information for you aspiring illustrators, and kind of lay out how this piece came to be. It actually starts last year when I did the cover for this image. That is the book cover for Candlekeep Mysteries for the game Dungeons and Dragons. Dragon Plus magazine was going to have a featured issue on Candlekeep Mysteries. So the art director reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested in creating the cover for that since I did the original cover. And I was interested. However, it only had a 4-week turnaround from beginning to final needing to get into their hands. Now you might be thinking, 4 weeks? That's plenty of time. That should be no problem. Well, yes, if that was the only project I had. But I needed to get started on this immediately, and I already had 4 other projects going on that had already been scheduled. So this would be the 5th project that would need to jump into my queue. And I just let him know that I already had some other things lined up, but if we can keep it moving quickly, then I could probably get him in there and it would be okay. They were okay with that. Always want to make sure that you're okay with the scheduling issues with your art director before you get started. And so we got started. Now, what do you start with on a project like this? Well, you read the brief. And the brief is the outline that is provided by the art director. For this one, it was pretty open. I got a PDF that had several pages of information. Some of it was specs about how big the image needed to be and what resolution. But the issue with this is that the book of Candlekeep Mysteries is actually a collection of short adventures. It's not one campaign adventure, which is very common with the D&D books. So I couldn't just do the main characters and then, some scene from that story. These characters actually don't exist in the book. They were just created in order to give the idea of some people in the Candlekeep libraries. So when it came to doing the cover for this one, it was very similar, that I needed to create a cover image for a book that I didn't know what any of the stories were, where any of the locations were, or who any of the characters are, but it needs to represent all 17 different stories. And the art director did give me some general ideas of, okay, maybe it's like somebody investigating a crime scene sort of feel, but of course it's medieval fantasy. And also ended with, if you have any other ideas, feel free to put them out. And so I went to my drawing board to start trying to think of some stuff, and I started with my roughs. This is just what you might call your ugly board. Just doing visual shorthand to get some ideas on the paper. What are some different directions that I could go with this? A couple of the ideas that kept kind of coming up was one, a pop-up book. That the characters are actually little figures on a pop-up book. I always remember playing with those as a kid and thinking those were kind of cool. And this does have to deal a lot with books and libraries and stories in books. The next idea was like a movie poster, sort of a collage of multiple scenes or locations that may give the idea of the mysterious adventures contained in this book. Big book in the foreground here, characters there, and then pages from books flying out. You can see obviously my notes, and this can be faster than actually rendering them in some cases. I just actually write out what it is, and then if I like that idea, I can go with it more later. Also want to cover a lot of different variations and not just do lots of the same thing. At this stage, it's all about throwing a very wide net and seeing what I'm getting a positive reaction from. We're starting to refine some of it a bit and develop the ideas. I thought it would be really interesting to have a scene where there is this dead beholder on the outskirts of the city, probably Waterdeep, and it's raining and it's at night, and you've got these two fellows. One guy's got a lantern here, this other guy's like examining the body, but it felt too specific because I have no idea if a scene like that takes place in any of these stories. And if I actually went with it, it would give the impression that if you played one of the adventures, you would come across this scene. For the sake that it was a little too specific, I didn't want to go with it. Did play around with the alley. That was something the art director talked about, maybe something taking place in an alley. And this is just something I enjoy doing sometimes, which is developing individual items or visual things that would help convey the story or the scene that needs to take place. What different things could help tell what the Candlekeep Mysteries is about? That would be investigating a dead body. You don't want to get too graphic, so you could just have like a dead hand that's kind of curling up there in the foreground. Keyholes, I think, are nice. Of course, keys, couple of variations. Thought about trying to get the head of the classic D&D ampersand dragon and make that like into the top of a, old skeleton key. This is where I was continuing on with that pop-up design with the pop-up character there and different layers of the city behind him. I thought maybe there would be like a clue board, like you see on the mystery conspiracy walls where you've got notes of different clues and you're tying strings between them. That also has a nice visual imagery, and that's the direction that I started leaning. I need to just get across the general feeling of mystery, investigation, the medieval fantasy world that this takes place in, but not be too committed to any specific characters or story taking place. I developed it to this point and I just wasn't feeling it. It wasn't coming across right. It didn't have the sort of impact or dynamic feel that I wanted. So I ended up just kind of discarding that idea. The next idea I wanted to go with was this one. It's more of the movie poster kind of collage style. Instead of the human face, I went with the skeleton face up here. We've got a silhouette of Waterdeep back there. We have the clue board behind him. And then we have this great fog design. Then you have your two sort of silhouetted hero characters there. The lantern at night is a great visual of investigation. Then there was some like pages here in the foreground that just show different scenes of investigation or these sort of different imagery that helps sell the idea. That was the most promising one I had, and although it wasn't a completed idea, I needed to at least get in touch with my art director and check his feedback to see whether this is something he liked or didn't like. Any amount of feedback was going to be helpful to proceed. So I did. I developed this a bit more. Over here you see some studies and did quick pose sketches. And of course this is something that was provided by the art director, which is the overlay of the text that would be on the cover. So you do need to design it so that none of the critical information would be behind it in the area with the text. We go to the submitted idea. I just threw in some basic color and values of light and dark, and this helps give the art director just a little idea of kind of the direction that I might be going with the lighting and color. So I submitted this off, got some feedback from him. He felt like it was okay, but if I had something else, then he would like to see that as well. I said I did. Let me go ahead and just work that up for you and check to see if that is something that you like better. So we moved on to my second concept. This one I felt a lot better about. And sometimes this is just something you have to develop, right? This is a process where this is all the concept phase. If you watch some of my other videos, I talked about the concept phase. This is all the work that you do before you actually start painting. And a non-professional usually underestimates how important the concept phase is. I will easily spend half of my painting time or half of the creation period in the concept phase, and then only half of the time actually rendering the painting. Where a non professional is more likely to skip a lot of the concepts and the idea development and go right into the painting. And that's always going to limit the ultimate impact and quality of that image. And you can see the layers of, like, I get my super rough sketch and then I do this one on top of it, and then that one gets it a little more accurate, and then I turn off my really rough one, and then I do another version on top of that and refine that. And each pass I do, I'm just kind of tightening it up a little bit, defining a little more detail. Now we're really getting to something that we can work with here. There's a couple of different design choices going on here. One is we are putting the characters central and we're creating basically a triangle with them. Triangles are one of the best compositional patterns you can use. Putting them center makes sure that they are the most important thing in the scene. I'm also getting that beholder body shape and that eye and placing it right behind that character, so that, again, using more composition, this is the target style composition of a ring inside of a ring, that makes it draw your eye there as well. The eye stalks from the beholder are also using as a radiating line pattern that helps draw your eye back there. And I am using the books as a framing device. I want to keep your eye in the central area, so I place a book here to keep your eye out of that corner. I have these two books to keep you out of this corner, and then there would eventually be a title there, which your eye would naturally wrap around that title. Each of these is also having a framing device here with that big stack, and this major book over here keeps you off of that side. So all these things are working together to keep your eye in that central area. This is a little pose reference I did at this stage, just using my webcam and of course myself, just to give the basic idea of, okay, what's that arm kind of doing that's holding that, how much is she turned, that sort of thing. Layers and values. Individual sections of the books, the foreground books, are put into one selection layer, the background book stacks are in a different selection layer, and the characters are in a different selection layer. And what that would allow me to do is simply select that one unit, and then I can paint in that unit without having to worry about painting over to the thing next to it. And this allows me to adjust the values and the lighting and the color of each section very quickly. So this is what I developed first. I'm just doing a value study. I did other value studies as well, but I just don't put them in here. And I'm trying to go for a mysterious feel. In order to get that feel, too much light will remove the feeling of mystery because there's nothing being obscured. And that's why I'm leaving a lot of it in more shadow and adding fog. Fog in atmosphere is a great way in order to soften out a lot of the values and give you more midtones. And it is a way to create depth. Huge tool in order to create depth. And this is something that I really need in this scene because we have lots of layers of things kind of in front of each other, overlapping. And if I can do a light to dark pattern going from bottom to top here, that creates a little depth. Put his dark edge against the lighter edge of her because she starts her own light to dark pattern as she goes up. And this is what I talk about as value pairs in my other videos, where he has a darker value here, she has a lighter value there, so they separate from each other. And we just keep doing this as we go back. The darker value of him goes against the lighter value of the background back there, and so that's a nice value pair, and it separates the two of them. And we're using this dark to light pattern on all of these different planes of objects. It keeps each plane standing out from the next one. Got to this stage, I did send this image over to the art director. He was very positive about this. He said, that is really capturing what we want. It is really playing into the books and feeling of mystery. So I had the green light to go ahead with that one, which is why I went on to the color. I didn't want to move to color and put that time in before I knew that this was a good direction. So using the same basic value scheme that we see right here, I developed the image on the left. Each one of these is keeping the same basic values, but using very different color. And these are hopefully a good example of what some color studies would look like. It's not changing just the color of an individual thing. I'm not just like changing the cover of this book. I'm actually changing the entire color and lighting dynamic of the scene to see what's working well. Now, I was going to be happy to use any of these. I thought all of these were going to be good. That's also a little tip. Don't send your art director options for something that you don't think you can do well or would be a good option. So I sent this over to him and I said, okay, this is what I've come up with. Which one of these stands out to you and which one should we develop more? He said that he was pretty happy with all of them, but all in all, he was going to go with this one. I said, happy to do that. How bright this light is became a real question. I had my lines, and then I have a couple of different versions. I do a version where they are more well lit, so that lantern is giving off more area light there. I do a version where it's much dimmer, and they're basically in shadow. And then I created this version in between to play around with. Maybe he's a little more illuminated and she's a more shadowed. Next, I start playing a bit with the side light. Where I was with the image is over here, and it seemed like it was lacking something. It didn't have quite the drama, quite the visual punch that I was looking for. So that's when I started playing around with this here, which is adding a secondary light source. But this light source would be obscured. You don't actually see where the light is, and you don't see what's illuminating it. And this is something that you actually see a lot in cinematography, in movies, where there'd just be this ambiguous extra light that's edge lighting the character in the scene that really helps them pop out from the background. Ultimately like the idea, but I don't want to get it too powerful. Otherwise, it'll sort of overpower the main lantern light, and it will take away too much of the feeling of mystery because it'll illuminate things too much. One of the biggest choices to go on with this image was that of style. Now, a standard style that I'm asked to do is these guys over here, which is a quite realistic, fully painterly image. There are no lines, no sketch lines. It's still visible. I paint out all the lines and I have a high level of realism. This is possible. I can do this, but this is also very time consuming, and I don't have that much time on this project. I started developing it as that direction, but I quickly understood, okay, with my other projects going on and how much stuff is in this scene, I don't think I'm going to be able to render this to that level and make it work that way. So what are my other choices? How else can I handle the rendering and the style that is going to look good but not take that long? So these are some of the other images I've done, and I started thinking in lines of these. This is another character I did for D&D, and I thought something a bit more like this. And this one, I still have some of my lines visible. They're only half painted out, and so it is a mix of the line supported by the painting back and forth. Somewhere in this range could be a lot faster, and that's what I ended up going with. But in order to make that happen, I did need to refine the lines in my image. They were just sketch lines. I hadn't initially designed them and drawn them to be able to support the image by themselves. They were a little rough. So I had to take a couple of hours and go back and do a redrawing or refining of the drawing so that the lines would look good in the final image. And it was kind of hard to go back to that stage and do that, but it was the call that needed to be made, so I did that. This is a frame of what it looks like without any lines. And you can see that it has the right direction to it, but it doesn't really hold up well. It's lacking. It doesn't hold up completely without the lines. This is it. With the lines, you can see how the mixture of the two really hold it together and how the lines are doing a lot of work. Now, as far as the lines, don't think that you always have to use black lines. And this is just the regular black sketch lines, but often what you'll see with good line illustrations like this is that the lines are very tinted. These are brown lines. I believe I actually had them as orange set to a multiply layer. And this way they actually blend into the painting a little bit more. With all of the books in the foreground, these foreground ones were actually made to reflect the books that are in the Candlekeep Mysteries book itself. I was provided by the art director with a collection of different images that were going to be in the book. I believe that each one of these books represents one of the stories that you can play in the book. And he said, hey, can we have the books actually have the covers of the stories in the book? And I was like, well, sure, yeah. Actually, that makes it easier because I don't have to come up with what the cover looks like. I can just base it on this reference image, so no problem. I just want to note a couple of things about the rendering before the image is completed here. The process is almost done. But for my illustration friends out there, I'll just make a couple of notes of things. A little visual shorthand here for the chainmail on our dwarf character. I found that if you just come in here and do a series of dashed lines, kind of dashed fat lines going this way, and then you have the next one going the other way, kind of connecting in like this. And this can give the nice little impression of a chainmail from a distance without having to go into actually drawing all of the chainmail, because that is ridiculous and that is well beyond the amount of detail that this image needed. A couple of other things. Wear and tear, a little texture, a little material rendering can go a long way as to giving life to an image and making it more interesting to look at. So you see this on the shield by having some areas where the paint has chipped off of the front there. You have different spots here along the edges of the metal where it's been rubbed a bit. It's a little shinier. You have some chips in the top of the shield. These little things can be great in order to add character. Other places is like on the leather, where leather will often get lighter on the edge, where it doesn't have the oil, covering it and keeping it darker. Also, about the lighting, this is a very illustrative, non-literal representation of the lighting, that this is not the most accurate lighting pattern. If this lantern is here shining its light out, there would be little to no light on this character. This was very non-literal, and I just added more light to her. And this just comes with experience and trying to judge, what would look good in the image versus what would actually be true. And that is what we ended up with, the final image that is being used on the Dragon Plus cover. I'm quite happy with this, especially given the amount of time that I had to work on it. If I could change things, would I? Yeah, absolutely. If I had more time, there were some other things that I wanted to do. Some of those things would include putting in the actual eyes on the end of the eye stalks here. I wanted to have some eyes back here. The beholder would have eyes on the end of his eye stalks, and I thought it would be nice to have those kind of scattered in the background. I'm also not happy with that dwarf arm and hand. That is definitely something that I would change there. But it's not about doing the best image that you can. As a professional illustrator, it is about doing the best image that you can under the constraints that you have. Divided out, I had a maximum of a week for this, including like back and forth time with the art director, and I'm very happy with how it came out, given those constraints. If you're interested in getting into the art field and getting the skills necessary in order to do work like this, then please check out my class over on Skillshare. It is called Illustrating Commissions, the Professional's Process. I love talking about art. I love teaching these things. And this is, frankly, the best class that I have put out that gives you an overview of the entire creation process from reading the brief and doing your sketches and doing your studies to taking it to a final image. It has been getting an overwhelmingly positive feedback rate over on the class. People have consistently found it very insightful, lots of good information. It is clearly broken down. A lot of the information is annotated on the screen so you can follow along exactly with what I'm saying. Plenty of examples so that you understand what I'm talking about. And the entire class is about 3.5 hours long and it's broken into 5-minute segments. Of course, when you're out there, feel free to check out all the other great classes on Skillshare. They have all kinds of creative classes and how to learn new skills. These cover things like cooking and creative writing and music. And the first 1,000 people to click through the link below can get a free premium trial membership to Skillshare, and you can use that, of course, to watch my class. And thanks so much for watching this video, and thanks for Skillshare for sponsoring it. And please check out the other videos here on the channel, a lot of other great content. And until you see you next time, keep drawing. Processes behind the creation of a recent image I completed. Let's take a break. Let's take a breakdown? Nobody says that.